Hey everybody, welcome to the Tablas Creek Instagram Live. I am, as always, Jason Haas. So my guest this week is a real treat. If you don't know Wanda Mann, she writes for or edits publications like Tasting Panel and Somm Journal, contributes to Food and Wine and the New York Times, and she and I went to the same high school. We were a year apart. We had a lot of mutual friends, though we didn't really know each other in high school, but it's been super cool to get to know her and follow her progress over the last decade or so. So, as I typically do, we'll have Wanda joining us momentarily. But I want to show you a few pictures as to what we have going on in the vineyard at the time of year when things are developing fast. The vineyard looks super healthy. So let me give you a couple glimpses into that. So this is a look in our Tannat block, looking up towards some Muscardin and Clairette Blanche. You can see how green and lush the canopies are. That's unusual in July. Typically at this time of year, things are starting to look like they're struggling a little bit, but not this year. Things look great. Last time I was out in the vineyard, we were still seeing some of the impacts of the frost that we saw in May. So I was really excited to see that some of the blocks, even with the young vines that were totally frozen back, I was worried we were going to have some vine loss. Those have almost all resprouted, and those are looking great. Another picture of a different young block. This is a Counoise block that we're planting in a kind of a sunburst pattern. Which we're trying to do for the first time, a dry farmed no-till block. So you can see the grasses from last winter's cover crop there. So anyway, that looks good. Super pleased by what I saw out in the vineyard. The one issue that we've had to deal with is that it's been fairly hot over the last month. We had a couple of days up over 105. You can see, this is a Tannat cluster that you can see a little bit of sunburn damage. Those kind of little small, hard, sour raisins. This is the vine's kind of self-defense mechanism in extreme heat. They pull some of the water out of some of the berries to keep themselves going. So we've seen a little bit of that, but not a critical amount, which I was relieved to see. But the big news, you don't see it in that Tannat cluster, is that we're starting to see veraison. So that's the point at which grapevines stop accumulating size and start accumulating sugar. More visibly, it's when they turn from green to red if they're red grapes, or turn from green to kind of yellowy green if they're white grapes. So this is a picture of Mourvedre. I can show you a picture of Cinsault, which again at a similar stage, just starting to turn. My guess is that we're at maybe 10% veraison for both Mourvedre and Cinsault. Then of course you get to Syrah, and Syrah is like halfway through veraison, and you can find clusters that look like they're almost ready to pick. They're not, of course. We've still got weeks to go before we're going to be bringing anything in. But it does seem to set the stage for maybe our earliest harvest ever, starting as early as perhaps mid-August. In the cellar, we are working on bottling our last of the 2020 reds. So we have Panoply. Is going into bottle today. We had the Esprit Red going into bottle the last couple of days. And I got a picture of Craig Ham, our assistant winemaker, looking very proud of a case of Panoply, which I love. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to invite Wanda to join. I saw her come through just a moment ago. So there we go. Okay, I just sent the invitation. And hey.
Hi.
How are you, Wanda?
Greetings from New York.
Excellent. What's it like in New York right now?
Finally, the heat wave is over, so you can actually get through the day without AC today, which is nice. There's a nice breeze. It feels good.
I was on the East Coast until this past weekend and spent the last couple of days in Boston, and it was miserable.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, the whole East Coast was just brutal, sticky, yucky.
We went to a Red Sox game the last night that we were in town, and had the twin displeasures of it being like 95 and humid, and the Red Sox losing 28-5, which like our boys were like, like, this is less fun than the other baseball games that we've gone to.
Not the best outing.
Amazing. Okay, awesome. Well, I gave everybody a super quick preview of some of the many things that you do in the world of wine. When I first started, I'm not sure when you jumped onto the live, but I mentioned the work that you do for Somm Journal and Tasting Panel, and the contributing work you've done for New York Times, for Food and Wine. So I always like to start by asking people to say sort of what was your track into wine? Was wine something that was like on your family table growing up? Was it something you
Not
came to
really.
later? And how did that happen?
No, I always say I need to find a shorter way to tell the story because I think, like so many people in wine, there's so many twists and turns. Wine wasn't on my table because my mom wasn't much of a drinker, but my dad was a professional chef. So he grew up in North Carolina, but he trained in New York and learned to prepare classic French cuisine. So I always call it the foie gras and grits childhood. Like I had the best of both worlds because my dad made amazing, North Carolina pulled pork. But how don't you ever call his beef stew, his beef bourguignon beef stew, because you get in trouble for that. So it was my dad who actually bought me my first bottle of wine when I was 16 and introduced me to wine and said, don't tell your mother. Because we always had a relationship that even in my, rocky teenage years when I was a bit of a handful, we could always communicate over food, and he would send me great care packages to school. And as a young adult, when I got my first apartment, he would kind of go through and do inventory like, oh no, that's bad, don't buy that. But my professional career was really events planning. And that led me to producing some wine tastings for a private club in New York. And I just found like, it made my job so much easier because those events would always sell out. It kept the members happy. It was a great way to fill the calendar. And through that, I was invited by one of the importers, like, oh, we liked working with you. Why don't you come to a tasting on your day off? And that was my first time. That was back in 2000. Maybe 10 or 11, I sat across the table from a winemaker and I was just blown away because I never thought of wine in that way. I mean, he's talking about, the grapes like they're his children, and he's throwing around terms I don't know, malolactic fermentation, and I'm jotting it down like Google that later. But it kind of, it lit something in me, and I started going to more wine tastings on my own, buying books, just learning as much as I could. And I was already writing at that point, but more about lifestyle and fashion and beauty. But I was like, I just started writing about wine. I still love all those things, but it's much more fun writing about wine than mascara for me personally. So that's the
I
long
think I
story.
would have the same feeling.
Yes.
Um, so I read an interview with you where you tied in the fact that you studied anthropology to one of the things that I think is always so interesting about wine, in that it's sort of a reflection of a place and a culture. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. You nailed it. Now, I can't say I went into my anthropology major with the grand vision of what career I would have. I honestly didn't know. But I was drawn to, learning about different cultures, linguistics, the religious rituals, the history, all of those things appealed to me. And there was writing and research involved. And you're right, wine is the same way. I always said if we had wine and science and history class in high school and college, I mean, I really would have aced it, because to me, it's another layer to all of those things. When you think about wines that have survived wars and families that have given everything to preserve a vineyard. And even now, you know better than anyone, each year you're praying to Mother Nature, like, please give us a good harvest, but you put your all into it, So anthropology, I think, really connects to wine in a beautiful way. So if there are any anthropology majors out there, if your kid is studying anthropology, there are jobs, not just wine, but wine is definitely a good route. It ties in.
And how about writing? Was writing something that you always loved to do?
Oh,
Thought
I've
that you would
always
want to
loved,
do?
yeah, I've always loved writing. And I've been writing a book for about 15 years. I always get sidetracked. But yeah, writing has always been the one constant in my life. And really for me, it opened all the doors. of my professional and educational career, going to school like Andover. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, handwriting those essays in blue ink, so writing has always been something I've loved, but also has really given me some great opportunities in life. So I love writing. I love telling stories. I come from a family of storytellers. I think it's because my family's from the South. Even though I was born in New York, I think there's just this natural, you tell these long, winding stories with all these detours, and then you get to the point. I try to be more succinct in my writing than the rambling that I'm doing now. But I do love
Not at
writing.
all. So how would you describe the way that you like to write about wine? I mean, because I know there are some people who are very clinical, probably makes it sound worse than I mean it to, but like they talk about, okay, there's this flavor and this flavor and this winemaking technique and this winemaking technique, and that's not, these are the things that I've read that you've done. That's not the way you usually go about it.
Yeah, I want
talk
to
about that.
say, yeah, technical writing is not my strong suit or my passion. I'm that person, like until recently, I love striking up conversations with people. I love to learn what drives people. So I don't do that on the subway much lately. That's a little dodgy these days in New York. But I approach when I'm writing a wine story that way, because there's so much that I can find, on your text sheet about, how you're toasting your barrels and what the pH is. I want to know why you do this. What motivates you? How are you preparing for the next generation? What story is your wine telling? What else in your life, other than wine, is that winemaker interested in? Because sometimes there are interesting parallels there. So I really like telling the story of the person, because yes, wine is a beverage, but I want people to see it as more than a commodity, that there's real people. And I think the more you know about that person, when you see that bottle, you think of Jason, right? Like, oh, there he is at Tablas. And, we talked about, I remember you picking up, the soil and saying, yeah, that's chalk, just those little things stay with you. So those are the things that excite me and that I like to share with my readers, those little tidbits about the people.
And I think you're totally right that that's also the way for your readers to make a connection to the things you're talking about. I mean, nobody connects to technical stuff particularly well.
Not particularly, no. And, some of the celebrity magazines, they have this section, celebrities, they're just like us, right? So it's kind of like winemakers, they're just like us. Just to humanize it, to show that the people that make this beverage that we all love and that connects us. And of course, I always like to educate us. Like, I always try to include at least 3 what I call cocktail party facts, so that if you're at a party, you can throw out these technical things and really impress your friends. But again, it's more about learning about the region, the place, the people. That's my focus.
And you were just out in Paso Robles, I know, where we reconnected.
Yes. Yeah.
That was last summer.
That I've lost track as well, but yes, I believe it was last summer. Yes, it was last June.
For a piece that came out in Food and Wine.
Yes. Yes.
Was that your first time coming to Paso?
I've been once before, maybe 2 years prior, but it was a group press trip. So it was a great introduction. But what I loved about the trip that I was on last year, it was just me. And I got to spend a lot of time with each winery that I visited and really, not have to share, ask the questions that I wanted. So it was really a deeper dive, which I really, really enjoyed. And I got to see, I think, a bigger range of places.
Yeah. And I mean, what's your thought on press trips? I mean, they're things that regions, I know Paso Robles, like we try to put on as a wine community, we try to put on a few press trips every year and get whatever 8 or 10 writers out at the same time and do an itinerary for them. Do you find those valuable or not so much?
Oh, definitely valuable. I mean, definitely, if it's a region that you're not familiar with at all, like I was glad that I had that previous experience of going to Paso, kind of getting an overview, knowing a bit about it, and then coming back on my own for that deeper dive. I know someone who said she's going to write a book about press trips, because not all press trips are created equal. And I think sometimes the important thing to remember is that if you want to get the best out of your writers, give us time. Don't send us to 8 to 10 wineries in a day. Give us a little bit of time to absorb it, enjoy the experience. It doesn't feel like you're just on this march. I've been on trips like that where as soon as you land, they're like, all right, it's 8 in the morning. You flew overnight. Let's taste some wine. Like, can I have a shower at the hotel first, maybe? So I
Yeah.
know writers sometimes we're like herding cats, but I think the trips that have a little more balance so that we really feel immersed and we're enjoying the experience, I think that comes out in the writing as well. So
I,
that's my.
I, I think that's good advice, honestly, even for people who are just visiting wine regions.
Yep,
Like, I mean, less is often more. Don't try to hit try to hit every winery you've heard of in 2 days. Like,
exactly.
give yourself the time and the space to really sink into the places you do visit.
So true, so true. And I get it, people, especially, we have limited time when we're traveling. You want to go to all these places, but I agree with you. Sometimes less is better, and you can always come back, and yeah, just balance, enjoy it. Don't feel like you're just rushing, 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 because often then it becomes a blur. When you get back
Right.
and someone says, how was your trip? You did so much that you can't even remember,
Totally.
which is, yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's true in a lot of things in life. Um, like, the more you try to pack in, you might remember a couple of highlights, but a lot of the other stuff just gets lost in the background.
Exactly, exactly.
So, um, in terms of like visiting wine regions, I'm gonna ask you kind of a question from two perspectives.
Sure, sure.
Do you have a favorite wine region that you have visited from just based on your own experience there, and then a favorite wine region that you like to recommend for like general wine lovers to visit?
Oh, this is always a tough one. I mean, I love going to places that I've never been as well. I think that's one of the reasons that I also love this job. It gives me a chance to travel to places I never would have imagined. Through no plan of my own, Italy is the country that I've visited the most in terms of wine. So I've been to Italy now specifically for wine trips at least 20 times, somewhere between 20 and 25 times, I think, in the past 5 years. Um, so Italy is a country that it's been a big part of my wine education because I really was kind of a rookie when I took that first press trip to Italy. And I just found for someone like me who was new to wine, it was actually very approachable. Everyone was very friendly. Even though there are so many different grapes and regions, I found that something about Italy I was just able to connect with. So in terms of Italian regions that I love, I've only been to Sicily once and I've been trying to get back. I really fell in love with Sicily and Sardinia. And, everyone loves Tuscany because how can you not? It's beautiful. I went to Umbria for the first time a couple of months ago. So my goal is to visit all 20 regions of Italy. I know Stanley Tucci's doing that now on his show, but I've been saying this for like 5 years. And Stanley got a show doing it, but it's okay. But also Spain, I love, because I spent some time there as a student. But, I haven't been to New Zealand yet. I haven't been to Australia yet. I don't know France as well as I would like. I've only been to the Finger Lakes twice, and I'm a native New Yorker. So there's a whole world of wine out there. And my friends say, you spend too much time in Italy, stop it. But when Italy calls, it's hard to say no.
Yeah, I'm super jealous. I think I've made 3 trips to Italy in my life,
Wow.
and only one of them was really like involved in wine in any way. The others were just kind of going. Either I had a friend who did his junior year in Florence, and I went to visit him, and
Yeah.
so I feel like Italy is a little bit of it's a thin spot in my own wine knowledge, just because it
Mm.
is such a complex and
Oh, it
historic
is.
and diverse area, and there's like close to there's almost 1,000 grapes that are in
I
Italy and
know.
nowhere else.
I mean, every time I go, I learn about minimum on the trip 5 new grapes. I'm like, what is that? But that's also what I love. But also, I just think in terms of consumers, pretty much every region, they have the winery travel experience just mastered. These agriturismos where you can stay at the vineyard and, the food is wonderful and the wine is wonderful. So I just think it's also an enjoyable way to really immerse yourself in a wine region. I think Italy does it very well.
So do you have any like regions that you're going to be visiting coming up? Do you have trips on the books?
I'm actually supposed to be going to France in October to Roussillon and Languedoc. So
Nice.
I'm excited about that. And I might be going to Italy in September. That just came through this morning, actually. So I'm trying to make it work. Um, Part of the challenge is it's very hard for me to say no. I love travel and I love this experience, but at some point you got to sit home and do the writing.
Right.
There is work to be done, and I have a life outside of wine, so balancing, those priorities. But it's very hard when you wave a wine trip in front of me. It's all bright and sparkly, and it's like, oh, I want to go, I want to go. So I've had to say no to a few things this year, only because after 2 years of no traveling, everything came back
Yeah.
with the visit. So I have been to Italy 3 times this year. So I can't complain.
So if you've been 20 times in the last 5 years, that means if you go on that trip this fall, then you'll be at least your annual average.
I think, yeah, I'll be at my annual average. And I made it to Spain this year. But then I also made it to places I hadn't been. Like I'd never been to Charleston before. That even though it's not a winemaking region, I was there for the Wine and Food Festival. So I've always wanted to go to Charleston, and that was a great experience. So I'm all about, visiting as many, domestic wineries as I can as well. I think it's a gap that I'd like to fill in my own wine knowledge.
I think that's sort of, I think you're not unusual in that. I think a lot of the wine community that's based on the East Coast of the United States, like Europe looms so large in the wine
Yep.
consciousness on the East Coast that, and it's honestly pretty easy to get to.
It's easy to get to. Yeah.
That it's one of the things that I noticed when I moved out here 20 years ago, and um, I'd been on the East Coast since high school, whatever, since growing up. But I was living in DC immediately before moving out here, and I'd spent the last year and a half going out and working with our distributors up and down the East Coast, and kind of trying to figure out what people in the market were saying about Tablas Creek, which was mostly nothing. Like we had very little profile in the national market in 2001 and 2002. But when I was explaining who we were, there was lots of talk about, oh, this is like Châteauneuf-du-Pape, talk about Beaucastel, talk about the Rhone Valley. And I found when I got out to California and I was doing the same thing with our distributors on the West Coast, like I would have to talk about Paso Robles and Syrah and Grenache and our farming. And like I would say Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and people would be like, yeah, I'm aware that exists, but that's not a reference point. And the difference between the wine cultures on the East Coast and the West Coast, I think it's narrowed a little bit, but it's still real.
No, it's true. And so often, you're right, especially in New York, all of the European winemakers stop here. And often, they'll come to New York for 2 or 3 days and then go back. And some will continue heading out west, but it is just logistically a bigger trip for many of them to do that. So you're right. We're blessed and spoiled a bit by the number of European producers that come to New York and have tastings. And it's been great. I can't complain. Maybe it's one of the things that keeps me in this crazy city, the proximity to the winemakers.
I mean, it is sort of, in a lot of ways, the center of the world. So,
yeah.
And that's reflected in the demographics of what sells in the marketplace too. If you're on the East Coast, it's roughly 2/3 imported wines and only 1/3 domestic. That is what sells. And on the West Coast, it's more like 70% domestic, 30% imports. So it's not just that. Like, yes, winemakers visit there. That's also, if you look on wine lists, you look on the shelves at wine shops, there's a real difference too.
True. And I guess that also makes sense, with the West Coast being home to Sonoma and Napa and Paso. Your wine regions are very beloved and accepted, whereas I think me being a downstater, even though I'm a native New Yorker, no one was thinking about New York wine. So New York City has always been very entrenched in French cuisine, Italian cuisine. So those were the wines that were just naturally a part of what we experienced. So that's a very good point, that we're much more focused on those.
Yeah, I mean, that was where my dad got his start. He was a retailer and then an importer in New York, and his discovery of California wine gradually in like the 70s and 80s was what set the stage for Tablas Creek. But it was, I mean, even me growing up, I grew up in a house surrounded by mostly French wine, not much in the way of California wine, because he was an importer. That wasn't his world.
Yeah. Exactly. But it is great. I mean, I'm still always fascinated. Like, it's true, every state makes wine, right?
Yeah.
Now, have I tried most of them? No, because the reality is most of them are not distributed naturally.
Yeah.
So when I get an opportunity to, like, someone sent me wines from Indiana last summer, I was like, yeah, bring it. I'll try it, you know? And Virginia's doing great
Yeah.
wines. It's just Texas wine. It's just so exciting that we really have more of a wine culture than we realize, even if it is smaller in certain pockets, but it's there. So that's a good feeling.
And I think it's such a positive indication just for the development of America as a wine drinking country, that
Hmm.
there is wine country that's pretty close to everybody.
True. And I think also, even for people who wouldn't call themselves like a wine geek like I would, I love seeing just on Facebook the number of my friends who really don't think about wine, but seeing wine as like something to do together. Let's go to a
Yeah.
winery for a day outing. Let's do that for our party. Like, that's just become a lifestyle choice for many people. And I think that's great that people are supporting the industry that way and are embracing it, that it's not as exclusive and something that, it's only for geeks and for those people, that it's embracing consumers who just want to enjoy wine in a pretty setting. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And honestly, most wine is grown in places that are really pretty.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. So I'm all for that. And some of those people do catch the bug when they're there, which I think is great, right? So,
I think there's something too about just the size of a wine bottle. It's not something that anyone is going to, it sort of encourages social behavior because
mhm,
it's not a size that somebody's going to finish on their own, but nor is it like a bottle of whiskey where like you don't expect to finish it in any short amount of time. It's
exactly.
sort of, a wine bottle is kind of a perfect amount to share with a group of friends,
True. Yeah,
which
for that moment, you're right. It is meant for sharing. And that's kind of the sad part sometimes of, that's what I missed the most during the pandemic, was the sharing aspect of
yeah.
wine, the traveling, going to tastings, just enjoying it with friends and family. But on the flip side, it gave me more time to study wine because I didn't feel rushed. So I could have a bottle and watch it evolve and just keep tasting and tasting, instead of going to a tasting sometimes where you have 15 glasses in front of you and an hour to taste them. So it was kind of nice to have that luxury of really getting to know the wine, have a conversation with the wine. So for me as a writer, I enjoyed that. But I agree. The social part is part of the magic.
Yep, for sure. Um, so I gave just sort of like a quick summary of the different outlets that you write for. You want to talk a little bit about how that sort of all fits together, how you piece together
Sure, sure.
what you do from a writing standpoint?
And thank you for, I have not written for the New York Times yet.
Oh, I saw it on LinkedIn. So,
Really? Oh, okay. I've written for Food and Wine, as you said. So yeah, I'm in a really good position because I started out writing for consumers through my own website about, I guess, 12 years ago now. So I write for consumers and trade, and so I enjoy that. So my role at the Psalm Journal, I'm really writing for a trade organization, but a lot of what I do there, really my beat is, again, more of the profile pieces.
right.
So writing about a winery, the history, what's going on there, what motivates them. And then I've enjoyed writing, for consumer publications like Food and Wine and Napa Magazine. So I can't complain. I think that's what's interesting about the wine landscape now, that I know some people who really just focus on social media and write beautiful prose on Instagram, and they have a following for that, and that's great. So I think traditional media will always be there, and I hope it is there because I'm someone who grew up with print magazine, and that's what I would spend my allowance on. I was a magazine junkie. So there is something about holding a magazine, right? And I'm sure it's the same feeling for you when you see your picture in the magazine as opposed to just online. It's a good feeling. But I'm open to all of the outlets because you reach different people, different audiences, and I like meeting people where they are. And I just think that's the reality for most of us. Some of my news I get on television, some on my phone, some in print, and that's what wine is now.
So, what if you had to look into your crystal ball and think about how kind of writing about wine or communication about wine might change over the next whatever next decade or so? Do you have a sense in a direction in which it might be going?
You know what I think's happening now, for a long time, except for a couple of very famous people, most people did not know the names of wine writers, nor needed to, right? We're really not meant to be a part of the story. We're the byline. But I think what's happened, and especially because of social media, writers are very focused on branding, and I think we have to be. That's just the reality of what it is. So for me, it's finding that balance of, yes, you do want your audience to feel connected with you and feel a certain trust, so that when they read that, it's like, okay, I feel like I know her a little bit. So for me, it's that balance of, I'm not trying to do this to become a celebrity. I was been perfectly fine for many years just behind my computer screen. But now we all have to do more of this, right? That's the world that we live in. And you need to do that to sustain those other opportunities. So I know that if I want to keep working in print and get that New York Times byline one day, that this is a part of that journey. And like I said, if Stanley Tucci ever needs someone on his show, I'm available.
I'll let him know next time we talk.
Yes. So I'm not opposed to those types of things. So I think all of us writers now, very few people are just writing behind the scenes. We all kind of have to have these personas and be open to these different experiences and push ourselves out of our comfort zone. I mean, 2 years ago, no one was comfortable doing this. Now here we are, right? So I enjoy it. I always say do things that scare you professionally. When I saw you in Aspen, when I was invited to present the seminar, I was terrified. But I was like, if someone asks you to do something, they're seeing something in you that maybe you haven't identified in yourself yet. So calm down, step up to the plate, prepare, seize the moment. And that's kind of how I never had a plan. Like I said, with the wine writing, I've just seized the moments and keep preparing, keep studying, be prepared, and just follow the road to see where it takes me. Not great business advice.
I don't know. I don't know. I think there is too much stock that often gets put in, like, make a plan and stick to it. Yeah. I think flexibility and being able to and willing to and mentally prepared to adjust to the things that come up in front of you, I feel like that's honestly been the most important piece of our own success as a business. And linear paths are overrated.
I mean, definitely in winemaking, you have to be so flexible, right? Of course, there's certain procedures in place, but as you know, like you said, if suddenly there's a hailstorm or something, you have to be flexible. You have to adjust constantly. So,
or a pandemic, or we've had to do a lot of pivoting, obviously, over the last couple of years. I think that we were able to do that because we were used to, like, just being open to pursuing new opportunities and new paths if they seem to open up in front of us.
So what are you most excited about these days?
I'm most excited about the regenerative farming piece of what we're doing. I saw a Twitter comment by Blake Gray, who's a writer based in San Francisco, writes for Wine Searcher and a bunch of other.
I know. I saw him just a few days ago.
But he said something that I thought was right on, which was that at the moment, every wine story is a climate change story. And so just being involved in something which potentially kind of shows a path by which wine and more broadly agriculture can be a part of the solution to some of these challenges, like that's something which is inspiring beyond just the day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year. How do we make the best possible wine? How do we take the best possible care of our customers? It's sort of something bigger than that I feel is really important.
And also, I'll be honest, I think wine is also a great vehicle for people who have not really connected to the climate change issue to understand it. Yeah. Right. I think as wine culture grows, this need to be urgent and how we address climate change. And I think wine is a way to really help spread that message because, oh, you like what you're drinking? You want to be able to keep drinking that?
Yeah,
You know,
seriously. Even just the challenges, like, I mean, we're looking at a start for harvest of August 15th, maybe this year. It's
so
the
early.
earliest, if that happens, it'll be the earliest harvest beginning that we've ever had. I talked to our partners in France, and I mean, this is the hottest summer that they've ever had in the Southern Rhone. There are issues with fires, there are issues with
Yeah,
water availability. I mean, there's just the viability of wine in these. I mean, wine is generally evolved in these areas that are fairly warm and fairly dry. And the difference between fairly warm and fairly dry and scorching hot and totally dry is the difference between being able to grow grapes and not.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, for example, what was happening in Champagne, and suddenly, the climate in England became ideal for sparkling, and now we just see a heat wave happening, as you said, right? So you're right. We've taken so much for granted. And this is showing us wine is just a perfect example of how we can't take it for granted. So so since I met you, because you were my first encounter with the term regenerative farming, and it's so nice to see that commitment to regenerative farming spreading, because I'm
Yeah.
hearing it just so much more now, and
Yep.
people are on that path.
And it really wasn't that long ago that we hadn't even heard of the term. I mean, when we
Mhm.
were approached to be a part of the pilot program for the regenerative organic certification, that was our first response was, what's regenerative? Like,
What is it? Yeah.
this was 2019. This was not a decade ago.
Yeah. How are those sheep doing? How's the sheep herder?
The sheep are doing great. We had a bit of excitement a couple days ago in that our guard dogs treat a bear that got a little too close to the sheep. So we have a big black bear in the tree yesterday. That
Oh,
we had to,
goodness.
we had to then move the sheep out of the way and move the dogs out of the way so the bear could climb down and wander on its way. Bears are not really a threat to
Okay.
sheep, but the dog certainly thought that it was.
Oh, wow. Did you
So
catch that on video?
we do. Let me see. I don't know if
That's
I can. I don't know if I can actually share a picture while we're both on screen.
yeah. I
Um,
don't
but anybody who is following this, we will certainly share some pictures
Oh my
social
goodness, that
media
is
because it's
intense.
it's cool.
Wow.
So it has been half an hour. I mean, I really could sit here and talk to you all afternoon. But I try to keep these to half an hour,
Yeah,
and I'm sure you have other
understood.
things that you need to do. Um, but it's been such a pleasure. Thank you,
Thank
Wanda.
you.
Thank you for
I'm
joining.
honored to be invited.
Thank you everybody who tuned in either from our end or from Wanda's end. And fingers crossed that we keep having good conditions for the next couple of weeks as we lead up to harvest. And I will see you all in 2 weeks. So, Wanda, before we go, can you let people know what the best way is for people who maybe don't already follow you or don't know what the best way is to connect with your work? Can you let them know?
Sure. On Instagram, Wine Dine Wanda, and then my website, winewithwanda.com. And my last name is Mann, so Wanda Mann, Mann.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much, Wanda. Thank you everybody
Thank
who
you.
joined us, and stay cool out there. I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.